We're in chapter 8. We did part 1 last week, and we kind of laid down the first part of the chapter to kind of lay down some of the rules and some of the guidelines for the second part where you apply them. And so our mission is to measure, to follow the instructions of Revelation 10 and 11 to measure the temple, measure the tabernacle pattern, and to digest that, to look very carefully at it, because once we do that, we're supposed to evangelize the world, to be able to be part of the last call, and so Noah's obedience was crucial to the preservation of God's covenant. By faithfully following God's instructions to build the ark according to the pattern that the Lord revealed to him, Noah ensured the survival and continuation of humanity and animal life through the flood. This act of obedience demonstrated his faith and trust in God's promises, thereby preserving the seed of the woman and ensuring the continuation of God's covenant promise for his people. Noah's actions exemplify how faith and obedience to God's commands are integral to the fulfillment and preservation of his covenant. From Adam to the last generation, the Lord promises to put his enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of Satan. The Lord continues to fulfill his covenant through the faith and obedience of those that he raises up from generation to generation. Our generation is specifically instructed to rise and measure the temple of God, those that worship God, and the original pattern given by God of the days and ways of worship. We are told to fully digest the little book of the covenant that God has opened to the end time generation for their observation and proclamation of its fulfillment. He has done this so that in our faith and obedience, that final evangelism of the world will echo the revelation of the truth to all those that God is calling out of Babylon and into his covenant. Our faithfulness is crucial to the preservation of the seed of the woman. We are not an afterthought. Our generation was foretold. It is only in obeying the instructions to measure and observe the tabernacle pattern given to Moses that our generation is able to observe this. We discover that every biblical covenant event in history occurred in exact accordance to this tabernacle pattern, from Adam to the flood of Noah, and continued all the way through to the seed of the woman in Jesus Christ. The Lord caused every fulfillment to occur in direct accord to his pattern. Jesus laid the cornerstone of the temple in his first earthly ministry. The capstone to complete the temple is at his return. We observed previously that the biblical timeline from Adam to the Ark of Noah and from the Ark to the ministry of Jesus occurred in direct accord to the 1.5 times 2.5 given dimensions of the mercy seat. The atoning sacrifice for mankind was made by Jesus at the exact time in history that the mercy seat foreshadowed. As we now take a closer look at the Ark of the Covenant and the crown event that it foreshadows, we will increasingly observe for ourselves that according to the given pattern, this crown event signifying his return is foretold to occur in our generation. We are not an afterthought. We were born into this blessed generation called to herald the return of the Lord. In terms of faith, we are in many ways the least of the generations that have preceded us. America is the stronghold of Christianity today, but faith in the literal truth of the biblical testimony has fallen to 20%. But the Lord has continually employed the lesser to overcome the greater. The Lord does not rejoice in the death of the wicked, but desires that none should perish. But the flood account is preserved in Scripture and in the fossil record to demonstrate that the Lord will execute judgment, fulfill his covenant, and deliver his people from the captivity of sin and evil. We will now return to continue to follow our given instruction to rise and measure the temple in our observation of the Ark of the Covenant. In this observation of the Ark, we will begin to apply all that we have discussed thus far to further our understanding of its prophetic significance. The dimensions of the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant are given as 1.5 times 2.5. We've observed the covenant event timeline from Adam to the atoning sacrifice of Jesus to be an exact accord to this mercy seat pattern as follows. The ark timeline, from Adam at creation to the ark of Noah at the flood, is 1,656 years. The mercy seat timeline, from the ark of Noah to the atoning ministry of Jesus in 27 AD, is 2,484 years. This 2,484 years is exactly 1.5 the 1656 year arc timeline. 1656 times 1.5 equals 2,484. This perfectly matches the 1.5 mercy seat breadth. The covenant length timeline, from Adam at creation to the ministry of Jesus in 27 AD, is 4,140 years. This 4,140 years is exactly 2.5 times the arc timeline. 1656 times 2.5 is 4,140. This perfectly matches the 2.5 mercy seat length. Let's get a drink of water. So I'm just reviewing what we've observed previously. So we have the 1656 years from Adam to the ark, the 2,484 from Adam, or from Noah to Jesus, and the 4,140 years from Adam to Jesus. And these are other covenant events that happened in between, also according to that 1.5 times 2.5 dimension. To establish a pattern, at least 3 points must be observed. An unmistakable pattern is established in the observance of the historical timeline of the 3 biblical covenant judgment events. 1, the judgment in the garden, back here at Adam. 2, the judgment of the flood, here with Noah. And 3, the judgment at the atoning fulfillment through Jesus Christ, the judgment at the cross. It is the 3rd point, the exact timing of the atoning act of Jesus Christ, that establishes the pattern. If the Anointed One did not arrive exactly 2,484 years after the flood of 1656 and 4,140 years from the creation of Adam, there would be no pattern to observe. But Christ did come in exact supernatural fulfillment of the mercy seat pattern given to Moses. So when you have a pattern, for example, if I look at these first 2 points, the first number is 5, next number is 10. I might be able to guess what the 3rd one is, but I need to have the 3rd one before I can be sure. It's 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. So, the 3rd is vital in establishing a pattern, because it establishes that there is a pattern. And we can clearly see that this pattern, this timeline, this covenant fulfillment timeline is exactly equal to the mercy seat that foretold it. It foretold that atoning event, and it was given 1,400 years in advance of it. We looked at these other numbers in here, that where we have other covenant fulfillment events, like we have the 7th generation that walked with God, and God took him. So that was Enoch. In the time between Enoch and Noah, we have Moses, who was the one who entered the new nation of Israel into the covenant. We have these covenant events, and they also happen in that same one, the first timeline to the ark, then 1.5 times 2.5. And we listed them here very briefly. So for example, Enoch is 621 times 1.5 equals 931.5. And Moses was born 931.5 years after the flood. Enoch times 2.5 is 1,552.5 years. And the birth of from the birth of Moses to the ministry of Jesus is exactly 15,552.5. So you see, these things aren't just random. They don't just happen to shoot an arrow at a wall and then paint a target around it. They fit the target perfectly. They fit the puzzle perfectly. The mercy seat pattern, and they're all covenant events, and they all work to that pattern, ending with Christ at that atoning event. So the birth of Enoch to the ark of Noah is 1,035 years. 1,035 times 1.5 is that same 15,552 number. with the birth of Moses to Jesus, but times 2.5 equals 2587.5. And from Adam to the birth of Moses is 2.87.5. That's adding 1656 to the 931.5. You get 25875. So incredibly, we have 5, known biblical people, heroes, from Adam to Enoch to Noah to Moses to Jesus, all in fulfillment of the covenant, the seed of the woman, all vital roles, and all, and they all fit that same pattern. Show me once, and everybody say, well, maybe it's a fluke. Show me 5 times, and we haven't even started. I was saying before we got started here, we'll look at Abraham, we'll look at David, we'll look at every covenant event. You're going to see the same thing. It's because it's supernatural. It's from God. It's evidence that this pattern originated from him. This pattern that he gave to Moses. This pattern he told Moses not to deviate from. This pattern that the disciples say that Christ came in exact fulfillment of. This pattern is the blueprint, this worship pattern for how he would fulfill the covenant. And he, but as in our generation, as we do this study, we're the first to realize that he, how precisely this has been observed through history. No one's talked about this before. Outside of this ministry and outside of us talking about it, nobody's talked about it. And all that we're doing is measuring, we're following instruction for our generation. We're measuring the tabernacle, and we're seeing what it reveals to us. And that means the furniture, the holy days, and they all give us another clue, another piece. And we only see these by observing the Word of God. If we don't observe the Word of God, we don't see these things. So that's what we've observed up until now. Clearly, these observations demonstrate that the pattern given for the mercy seat and its given observations of the Day of Atonement perfectly match and foreshadow the biblical timeline of the covenant events fulfilled through those that God raised up from Adam to Enoch to Noah to Moses to the atoning ministry of Jesus Christ in fulfillment of his covenant. No reasonable person could deny the observance of this pattern, but in the incredible supernatural prophetic truth of the Word of God, we're given even further understanding regarding the specific timing of the events. So now we introduce observing the Sabbath. And we introduce that because we're looking at things in the order that God showed Moses. So he showed him first the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat. And of the holy days, the first that he told him to record was the Sabbath. They'd been observing the Sabbath before, but he gave that as the first. He gave that as, in fact, the sign of the covenant. When Noah was born, his name was given to denote his prophetic calling from God. He named him Noah, saying, "This one shall bring us rest and comfort from our work and from the dreadful toil of our hands, because of the ground which the Lord cursed." So he would give the seed of the woman, which is that line that his father was from, his grandfather, all the way back to Adam, that he would, in his name, Noah, bring rest. And rest, of course, is the Sabbath day is the day of rest. Note that his name literally means rest. He was foretold to bring rest to the lineage of the seed of the woman, to the Lord's covenant response to the curse of the seed of Satan. The entire covenant is a promise to restore humanity to the Sabbath rest they experienced in walking together with God in the absence of sin in paradise. Noah's association with the Sabbath is clear. Now let's take a closer look at the 1656 years from Adam to the Ark of Noah in comparison with the observance of the Sabbath. The weekly Sabbath is given to be observed every seventh day. There are 24 hours in an observed day. If you want to take your calculator out right now and verify these things as we go along, then that would be a good time. Just take your phone and pull out the calculator. So the sixth day ends at the end of 144 hours. 24 times 6 is 144 hours. The seventh day then begins, and it ends 24 hours later after 168 hours. The 6.9 days is 165.6 hours. 24 times 6.9 equals 1656 hours. The seventh day ends 2.5 hours later. 7 times 24 equals 168. 69 days, 69 days, so that's 6.9 days is 1656. 69 days equals 1656 hours. 69 times 24 equals 1656. Thus, the 70th day ends 24 hours later. 70 times 24 equals 1680. Remember, we're looking at the 1656 timeline from Adam to Noah. Note that the exact timing of the flood at the Ark of Noah was 1656 years. This calls us to view the flood event in relation to the weekly Sabbath observance. Noah is the 10th generation from Adam in the fulfillment of the preservation of the seed of the woman, and the flood occurred 1656 years from Adam. Just as the 70th day represents the observance of 10 weekly Sabbaths, the 70th day begins with the next tick of the clock after 1656 hours. So we got 69 times 24 is 1656. The very next tick of the clock is the first hour of the 70th day. So it's like I said, and that's 10 times 7, 10 Sabbaths, just as Noah was the 10th in the line of Adam. So here's some observations. We're going to drink water here. The 69th day is complete at the end of 1656 hours. Sorry, I got a little bit of a typo there, but 69 times 24 equals 1656 hours. The 1657th hour is the first hour of the 70th day that ends at 1680. The 70th day represents the completion of the observance of 10 7-day weekly Sabbaths. The flood at the time at that time, the Ark of Noah was prepared, occurred 1656 years from Adam. Noah is the 10th generation from Adam and was the last surviving of the seed of the woman. We showed earlier on in the chapter how that sometimes there's 9 generations that were alive all at the same time. But by the time of Noah and the flood, and the death of Methuselah, he was the last of the 10 generations. Scripture refers to each generation as days. So, for example, all the days of Adam were 930 years. Noah means rest. He brought rest to the 10 generations after 1656 years, just as after 1656 hours, the 70th day begins and represents the fulfillment of 10 weekly 7th-day rests. When I say he brought rest, remember that the Lord said there was wickedness all around him, that Noah alone was found righteous. And if he would have waited any longer, Noah would have been overpowered and there would have been no seed of the woman. Instead, the judgment of the flood was sent, and the seed of the woman was preserved, and there was a new beginning. The Sabbath of years and Jubilee and the Ark of the Covenant event talent. So the 1656 we looked at in terms of the weekly Sabbath. Now we're going to look at the Sabbath of years and the Jubilee and look at the same Ark of the Covenant timeline. The timing of the covenant event of the flood at the time of the Ark of Noah and its direct relationship to the observance of the weekly Sabbath is made even clearer when we observe the instructions given for 7-year Sabbath rest and the 49 or 7 times 7 years in the declaration of the Jubilee. We will first review what was given by Moses related to their observance in the tabernacle pattern. So the 7th-year Sabbath rest and the Jubilee. And you can find this in Leviticus chapter 25. Leviticus 25, the Lord commands the Israelites to observe a Sabbath for the land and to observe the year of Jubilee as a time of liberation and homecoming. The biblical testimony places special emphasis on the Sabbath and its relationship to the covenant, beginning in Genesis 2, verses 2 to 3. So that's from the very beginning, the second chapter, the second verse of the second chapter. An emphasis began on the covenant. It continued all the way through Exodus and the book of Leviticus in a list of appointed festivals and holy convocations listed in Leviticus chapter 23. The weekly Sabbath takes first place. The people are to work 6 days, but the seventh day is to be a Sabbath of complete rest, a holy convocation. In chapter 25, the land itself is granted a Sabbath rest. Every seventh year, the land is to lie fallow. No sowing of fields or pruning of vineyards is allowed in the Sabbath year. Echoing the commandment in chapter 23, there is to be a Sabbath of complete rest for the land, a Sabbath for the Lord. The Israelites, their servants, their livestock, and even the wild animals are allowed to eat what the land produces of itself in that Sabbath year, as well as what they have stored from the sixth year, from the promise that there will be enough provision of food for all. So they're to trust the Lord from what he produced in the sixth year, what the land would produce of itself, that they were to leave it fallow, and there would be enough for all. The text goes on to speak of a Sabbath of Sabbaths, the year of Jubilee. This year is set by counting off 7 Sabbaths of years, or 7 times 7 years. The 50th year then is to be the year of Jubilee. It is proclaimed with the blowing of the ram's horn on the Day of Atonement, the 10th day of the 7th month. The Jubilee is a time of high Sabbath rest, a time of homecoming, a time of liberation. The land is to lie fallow as it does in the Sabbath year. Everyone is to return to their ancestral land and to their clan. Debts are to be forgiven, slaves to be set free. The land is to be returned to its original owners or their descendants. In other words, if a person had to sell his land or himself to pay off debts, this sale was limited and not permanent. Both land and people are set free in the Jubilee. This liberation is based on 2 primary claims. Number 1, that the land belongs not to the one who buys it, but to the Lord. The land shall not be sold in perpetuity, for the land is mine. And think about that. We have a house right now. We bought a house and we spend our lifetime paying off the mortgage and we own it. But at some point we pass on. And so maybe the house goes to our children, but at some point it might be sold. But even, for a house after a couple hundred years, it requires a lot of maintenance. It might, be destroyed totally. But there's different people that'll own it. You're not going to be the only one that owns that piece of land. And what the Lord is saying to the Israelites is that the land is his. He gives it to who he desires. But so they're not to view the land as something that that is sold in perpetuities permanently to somebody else. And it is an incredible way of ensuring that when the land's given to a family, that they're able to keep that inheritance. If they have to sell something to get out of debt, the father has to, well, then the children inherit the land. Likewise, the Lord's people were not to be anyone's slave. For they're my servants whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. The land and people belong to the Lord. Both are released in the Jubilee from any other claims on them. So, yes, there could be a claim on, you had to sell your labor to pay off debts. You had to sell your home, whatever it was. But at the Jubilee, no other claim can be on them. They belong to the Lord, and the Lord set them free. Leviticus 25 also provides for redemption of land to people between Jubilee years. So, in advance of the Jubilee, if land or people are sold to pay off debts, the nearest relative of the debtor is able to redeem the land or person by buying them back. The purchase price is to be computed according to the years until the Jubilee. That is, the buyer, either the original buyer or the redeemer, is purchasing harvest, not the land itself. So I'm purchasing 20 years of harvest because in 20 years the Jubilee is, or if it's the very first year, 49 years of harvest. So I'm not really purchasing the land, I'm purchasing harvest. The buyer is paying for the people's labor, not the people themselves. You're not buying that person. That slave is not, you're not buying them. You're buying their labor for an X amount of years. Because of the Jubilee, the most you're buying their labor for it is 49 years. But at any point, a kinsman redeemer can come along and say, look, Joe has 23 years of labor left. I'm going to buy that out. I'm his nearest relative, and I want to see him free, or his land. So there's a rule, a regulation that if your kinsman, your near relative, could come and set you free. If there was no one to redeem the land or people, both are released in the Jubilee. So if we don't have anyone, then the Lord does it himself. This remarkable vision of the Jubilee, a vision of economic and social justice and liberation, purpose for us to envision the beauty and the value of the forthcoming redemption of the Messiah, the anointed Son of God, who would take upon himself in nature of a man. So he would become our kinsman, redeemer. He'd become as one of us. Through the payment of the penalty of our sins, through his own sinless blood. This whole idea of the Sabbath, and then getting higher the Sabbath year, and then the Sabbath of the Sabbath, and leading to the Jubilee. It's this continual fulfillment of Sabbath after Sabbath, of growing, rest and restoration with the Lord, and leading to a final, liberation and freedom, through the same Lord. It's incredible. So this Jubilee is the height and culmination of the Sabbath after an ongoing series of Sabbath fulfillments. Uninterrupted, ongoing weekly Sabbath observed every seventh day. Yearly Sabbaths fulfilled every seventh year, culminating in the height of the Sabbath of Sabbath, celebration of complete redemption and restoration land, and all the people to occur exactly on the Day of Atonement, on the 10th day of the 7th month, after 7 times 7 years of Sabbaths have been observed, and all debt is forgiven. Then came Peter to him and said, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? Till 7 times? Jesus said unto him, I say not to thee until 7 times, but until 7 times, 70 times 7 times. The covenant promised to redeem man and reconcile him together with God, so man could once again enjoy a Sabbath walk together with the Lord. In the absence of sin was made to the first generation. The same covenant promise spans through every generation into the last. The redemptive forgiveness through Christ is for them all. Each holy day given for our observance in the tabernacle worship pattern is referred to as an appointed day. The Lord appointed the day by declaring it as holy and setting it apart from all other days for our observance. This observance was twofold. Number one, it was a covenant fulfillment memorial. So when he said the day is being holy, it was to memorialize an act by the Lord on behalf of man in fulfillment of his covenant with man. The first being the seventh day Sabbath, to memorialize the Lord ceasing from his work of creation or completing the work, and setting aside the seventh day to walk together with man in the absence of sin and in fulfillment of the covenant declared in heaven towards the Lord's blessing man upon the creation. And the covenant fulfillment rehearsal. The same holy day was meant to be observed as a temporary rehearsal for future covenant eternal fulfillment. After man had rejected his covenant, the Lord provided a way for all who desired to re-enter his covenant to be able to do so in their faith in his word. The weekly Sabbath observance became both a memorial and a rehearsal, a memorial of the original creation covenant fulfillment, and a rehearsal for the promised eternal redemptive restoration of the covenant relationship. Because the appointed days are all covenant fulfillment based, they're all given in relation to the original seventh-day covenant fulfillment Sabbath. There is a weekly Sabbath every 7 days. There are 7 annual appointed holy feast days, each considered an annual holy Sabbath. There is a 7-year Sabbath, all culminating at the end of 49 years, or 7 times 7, on the Day of Atonement on the 10th day of the 7th month. 7. 7 times 10. 7 times 7. 777 versus 666. This relationship of the 7th to the covenant fulfillment is vital for us to observe. Having now reviewed the instructions revealed to Moses regarding the observance of the 7-year Sabbath and the Jubilee, we will return to our observation of the biblical timeline event. We have already compared the 1656 years timeline of events from Adam to the Ark of Noah to the 1656 hours that transpire every 69 days prior to the 70th day 10-week Sabbath. We will now begin to observe the 2484-year timeline from the Ark of Noah to the flood, to the atoning ministry of Jesus, and employing what we have learned regarding the 7th-year Sabbath and Jubilee. We'll also apply some of the biblical rules for prophetic interpretation that were discussed earlier in the chapter to enhance our understanding and amplify our observations. So those are the ones we talked about last week in part A. So one of those is a day for a year prophetic rule applied to observing the biblical timeline. The day per year principle is derived from passages like Numbers 14:34, Ezekiel 4:6, where a day is symbolically used to represent a year in prophetic fulfillment. This method of interpretation is applied to various prophetic timelines in the Bible, such as the 70-week prophecy of Daniel. The prophetic relationship, the day per year principle, helps in understanding the fulfillment of long-term prophecies, such as the 490 years or 70 weeks leading to the coming of the Messiah, in Daniel 9:24-27. It provides a framework for interpreting other prophetic periods, such as the 1260 days, 1290, 1335, mentioned in Daniel and Revelation. So the application of a day for a year to biblical event timeline. Therefore, we can observe the 2484-year biblical timeline, so that's 2484 year, from the Ark of Noah to the atoning ministry of Jesus, as the fulfillment of 2484 prophetic days. If you take a day per year, then we look at the years and go, okay, in prophecy, that would be 2484 days. Now we look at the 360-day length of a prophetic year. The significance of prophetic year is considered to be 360 days. This is evident, for example, in the account of the flood and in the book of Revelation, where 42 months, Revelation 11:2, and 1260 day, Revelation 11:3, are used interchangeably as a suggestion of a 30-day month and a 360-day year. The prophetic relationship, the 360-day prophetic year, is used in calculating prophetic timelines, providing consistency and interpreting periods like the 1260 days, 1290, 1335. It aligns with the day per year principle, helping to understand the fulfillment of prophecy over extended periods. So in other words, you have two principles: one, a day per year, and two, that year, that prophetic year, is 360 days long. So we're going to take those two principles, a day per year and a 360-day length of a year. And we're going to look at the second time frame of 2484 years from Noah to Jesus. Application of the 360-day length of a prophetic year to the biblical timeline. 2,484 days divided by 360-day length years equals 6.9. 6.9 times 360 equals 2,484. Just as we observed that 69 days in the 1656 hours of an apparent 7-day weekly Sabbath from Adam to Noah, here we observed 6.9 years of an apparent 7-year Sabbath from the Ark of Noah to the atoning ministry of Jesus. So in the first, when we're looking at the 1656 years, it calls our attention to the weekly Sabbath. When we look at the second period of 2,484 years, it calls our attention to the 7-year Sabbath. So one is the 7th-day Sabbath, one is the 7-year Sabbath. 70-week prophecy of Daniel. And we're going to see more here in a second. So now let's look at the 70-week prophecy of Daniel. The 70-week prophecy in Daniel 9:24 to 27 is a key messianic prophecy that outlines a timeline for the coming of the Messiah and the fulfillment of God's covenant. It divides the 70 weeks, or 490 years, into 3 segments. 7 weeks, 49 years, 62 weeks, 434 years, and 1 week, 7 years. After 69 times 7, or 483 years, which is the 49 plus the 434, or the 7 plus the 62. So after 69 weeks, or 483 years, the Messiah would arrive in Jerusalem. The prophetic relationship. The prophecy foretells the coming of the Anointed One, Messiah, 483 years, or 69 times 7, after their decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, culminating in the ministry of Jesus Christ. Halfway through the 70th week, the Messiah would be cut off from among the living, but not for his own sake. This is clearly interpreted as the 3.5-year period of Christ's atoning ministry and the subsequent events fulfilling the establishment of the new covenant. So the application of the 70-week prophecy of Daniel to this biblical timeline. The 70-week prophecy of Daniel is foundational to every prophetic interpretation of the fulfillment of the covenant through Jesus Christ, because we were so clearly able to observe it. Daniel was in captivity after Babylon and ruined the temple in Jerusalem at the time he recorded the revelation of this prophecy. Over 100 years later, in 457 BC, the forceful decree was made by a pagan king to return and restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Exactly 483 years later, Christ began his atoning ministry in 27 AD. Note there's no 0 in transitioning from BC to AD. It goes from 1 BC to 1 AD. That's 57 years BC, then skip to 1 AD, and add 26 years for 483 years at 27 AD. Not only can we clearly see this today, but there was an expectation throughout Jerusalem at that time for the arrival of the Messiah because of Daniel's prophecy. Ever since the observation of the fulfillment of this prophecy was observed in the exact timing of the atoning ministry of Jesus, early church fathers and all the way through to modern biblical scholars have better understood the prophetic interpretation of biblical prophecy. But Daniel also foretold of events in terms of leading to our understanding of the 1,260 days being equal to 3.5 years of 360-day length, consisting of 42 months of 30 days length. These prophecies will be discussed further detail henceforth. The bottom line is that the fulfilled prophecies of Daniel help to establish clear and reliable rules for interpreting biblical prophecy, such as the 360-day length of a prophetic year. Presumptuous biblical critics have jumped on this to make rash and arrogant dismissive statements such as, does God not even know how many days are in a year? Comparing this 360-day length and saying, well, how can this be a God if he doesn't know that there's more than 360 days in a year? Allow me to now show you something that has not been previously revealed through any other source outside of this ministry. This is a new rule for the interpretation of prophecy that can be applied to the observation of all biblical events. And that's the rule of observed years versus prophetic years. 69 in observed time is equal to 70 in prophetic time. The difference between the observed year, so the 365 plus day solar year, and a 360-day prophetic year is exactly equal to the difference between the number 6.9 and 7, and their multiples. So in other words, 69 and 70, 690 and 700. In other words, the number of days in 6.9 observed solar years is equal to the number of days in 7 prophetic years. We observe 360 days times 7 prophetic years equals 2,520 days. 2,520 days divided by 6.9 equals years that are 365.21739.13 days per year. Exactly a solar year from versus a prophetic year. If we go the other way around, the difference. So what's the difference between the 365.2 versus the 360? The difference between a 365.2 day observed year and a 360-day prophetic year amounts to the difference of 365 minus 360, which is 5.2 days per year. So every year, it's the difference between a prophetic year and an observed year of 5.2 days. So 2 years, it's 10.4. And something incredible happens at the 69th year. This difference, the number of days in observed years versus prophetic, accumulates each year so that every 69 years, the difference is exactly 360 days. As per, just take 360, divide it by 69, and you get that same number, 5.21739 days. So every 69 observed years equals 70 prophetic. So there's that odd number, that with 9 decimal points there, 5.21739. If you times that by 69, you get 360. It accumulates every year, that 5-day difference. So exactly on the 69th is 360-day difference. So that 6.9 or 69 or 690 observed years will always equal 7 or 70 or 700 prophetic years. Like I said, that has been discussed outside of this ministry, but it's a rule that we find very useful. Because we measure all time in the same manner. In other words, our observation comes from our observation of the celestial bodies. So we measure all time the same manner after our observation of the apparent movement of the celestial bodies. The 6.9 observed unit of time always equals 7 prophetic. 6.9 observed units of observed solar time, so whether that's an hour, a day, a year, will always equal 7 units of the same prophetic time. So 7 hours, 7 days, 7 years. So it doesn't matter, because we measure time, hours, days, years, the same way. And so 6.9 of any unit of time is going to equal 7 prophetic. To convert observed time into prophetic time, divide the unit by 6.9, then multiply by 7. So for example, 2,484 observed days, you divide that by 6.9, which equals 360. You times that by 7, equals 2,520 prophetic days. So 2,400 observed days, observed solar days, is actually equal to 2,520 prophetic days. 2,484 equals 2,520 prophetic. To convert the other way around, prophetic time to observed time, divide by 7 and then multiply by 6.9. So for example, 1,680 prophetic years divided by 7 times 6.9 equals 1,656. So when you divide that by 7 and then you times that by 6.9, 1656. So that we observed that the number of days in 1680, 360-day prophetic years is equal to the number of days in 1656, 365.2 day observed years. And here it is. 1680 times 360 equals 604, 800 days, divided by 1656, again equals 365.2173913. So to convert, you observed to prophetic, you divide by 6.9 and times by 7. To convert prophetic to observed, you divide by 7 and times 6.9. So you can practice that. You can look at it. You have the book, but it's important for our observation right now. So this observed relationship between observed time and prophetic time is founded upon two fundamental facts. One, observed time. Man was encouraged to learn to measure time based on our observance, of the celestial bodies. From our perspective on Earth, the sun, moon, and stars traverse our sky in an observable, reliable, measurable, and predictable pathway. It doesn't matter what's rotating, what's not rotating, what's orbiting. Just simply when we look at something and we see it in one spot and we can track its path, that's how we observed time, because we saw it in one spot, then how long did it take to return to that same spot? So this journey across our sky begins at a fixed starting point and returns to the same fixed starting point. For example, the sun appears to travel across our horizon at a rate of 15 degrees every hour until returning to the same location 24 hours later. So in other words, I could take my hand and hold it up, which kind of roughly is 15 degrees, but I can see the sun from sunrise every hour, every 15 degrees. And if it happened to be a 12-hour day, I could see that increment. And then within 24 hours, I would see the sun again at that same spot. And so that's how we learn to measure a 24-hour day. Same thing for years, or we see the suns or stars travel across the zodiac and move throughout the year, throughout the seasons, and then return to the exact same spot. So we are encouraged to measure time based on our observance of the celestial body. So from our perspective on Earth, this is what we see. Their journey across the sky begins, for example, the sun appears to travel across the horizon at a rate of 15 degrees per hour until return to the same location. But we divided our observation of the sun into a 360-degree daily journey. So 24 hours times 15 degrees per hour equals 360 degrees. That was the numbers the Babylonians came up with. As our observations became more precise, we added a further division of 60 degrees that we called a minute. Then a second division of 60 degrees that was originally called a second minute, but is now referred to as simply a second. So today we divide the observation of a day in 24 hours times 60 minutes per hour times 60 seconds per minute, for a total of 86,400 seconds every 360-degree measurement of the daily observation of the sun. So that's, at the time of Jesus, there was no minutes, there was no seconds, there was just hours. But as time progressed, we divided more and more and more precisely until today, when we come to these type of numbers. The same is true for our observations of the length of a year. We measure the apparent journey of the sun across the zodiac until it returns to the same starting position each year. So that's observed times. Appointed times. In the Genesis account, the Lord revealed the purpose given for the man's observation of these celestial bodies. And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them serve for signs and for appointed times. In some translations, it'll say seasons. Excuse me. But in the Hebrew text, in the most original, it's obvious that it's they're for signs for appointed times and for days and for years. So they were to serve, we were to understand time, but they're also to help us serve the days that God would appoint, the appointed times. The observation of time was foundational. I was given to also serve the ability to observe the appointed times. These are the times we would learn to observe through revelation from the Lord. So we learn to measure observed time through observation. We learn to observe appointed times through revelation. These are the times we would learn. The appointed times of the Lord are not based on general observation, but on the specific revelation. The seventh day has nothing to do with the apparent movement of the celestial bodies. It is every seventh day, without interruption, from one fulfillment to the next. The 360-day prophetic year is based on the appointed length. It's not because it's 360 days. It's because that's the amount of days appointed to the prophetic year through the prophets. Observation of the appointed times signifies our faith in the Lord that appointed them. In other words, he appointed the seventh day to be observed every seventh day. And when we observe that seventh day, when we rest in that seventh day, excuse me, then we're signifying that our faith in him, because why else would we observe that day? There's no observation that we should observe that day. The only way we're observing that day is because it's been revealed that the Lord has set it aside and declared it holy for our observation. So appointed times are from revelation. Observed times are from observation. The Lord wanted us to understand both. After thousands of years, all of mankind has learned to measure time in agreement with the observation of the celestial bodies. But not all of mankind has learned to observe the appointed times in agreement with the Lord through the tabernacle pattern revealed to Moses. Each of these appointed times, beginning with the Sabbath, is given in relation to the covenant fulfillment. It is only through our observation of these appointed times that we're able to witness their fulfillment. So it is now we can return to our observation of the biblical timeline and harness all of what the biblical testimony has revealed as we follow the Lord's instruction to measure the pattern. So we're going to take a break here. We've gone through these different rules. We're looking now particularly at this second period of time, that 2,484 years. We're looking at everything that we've been taught by Scripture, and it's going to be exciting in the next part here. I'm going to fill up my cup of water, take a good drink, take a little break. I'll be back in 5 minutes. We'll start.
And I'll turn it off YouTube and back on. So
Okay.
they're separate.
I'll be ready to start.
That's very good. I love all those timings for the feast and everything. It's all there. The pattern's there.
You're gonna see some cool things in the next hour.